The water heater gurgled like a dying animal in our garage, and I was elbow deep in rust and regret when I heard Jessica's voice through the thin wall. It was past midnight, and she was supposed to be asleep. "Yeah, same room, same plan," she whispered into her phone. "Tell him it's all mandatory training." I froze, wrench in hand, listening to my wife of 18 years giggle like a schoolgirl. The sound made my stomach turn. Nothing says team building like a heart emoji at midnight, I thought bitterly. My name is Nathan Ward, and until that moment, I believed I had a decent life. I'm 39, built my IT consulting business from nothing, and thought I'd married my best friend. Jess and I met in college, struggled through the early years together, and finally made it to the comfortable suburbs with our 2 kids, Mason and Lila. But comfortable had apparently become boring for my wife. "The connection here is terrible," Jess continued, her voice carrying that fake professional tone she used when lying. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel tomorrow." I heard her footsteps padding back toward our bedroom, and I stayed frozen in the garage, staring at the water heater's exposed guts. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair, while my marriage leaked trust all over the concrete floor. The next morning, Jess fluttered around the kitchen in her new designer suit, the one she'd bought for client presentations. Her travel bag sat by the door, packed with clothes I'd never seen her wear around the house. "Another conference?" I asked, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one that said "World's Greatest Dad" that Lila had given me last Father's Day. "Training seminar in Denver," Jess replied without looking up from her phone. "Derek thinks it'll be valuable for the whole team." Derek Malone, her boss. The smooth-talking VP who drove a Tesla and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I'd met him at company parties, the kind of guy who called everyone sport and had opinions about wine. "How long this time?" I asked. 3 days, maybe 4 if the sessions run late. She finally looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Excitement? You know how these corporate things go. I knew, all right. I knew that her business trips had doubled in the past 6 months. I knew that she always had bad reception when I called. I knew that her expense reports were getting creative, and her stories were getting vaguer. What I didn't know yet was how deep the rabbit hole went. After Jess left for the airport, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the dresser where she'd hurriedly packed. Something white caught my eye, a hotel receipt that had fallen behind the furniture. I picked it up, and my world tilted sideways. The Marriott downtown Denver, King Suite, 2 nights. But this wasn't from her upcoming trip. This was from last month's certification workshop. I walked to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept her work receipts. There it was, another receipt from the same hotel, same dates. But this one showed a standard room, single occupancy. 2 receipts. Same hotel, same dates. Different rooms. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed the Marriott's number. "Good afternoon, Marriott Denver. This is Sarah speaking." "Hi, Sarah. This is Nathan Ward. I'm calling about a reservation from last month. My wife Jessica Ward stayed with you, and I'm trying to reconcile some expense reports." "Of course, sir. Let me look that up." I heard typing. "Yes, here it is. Mrs. Ward, King Suite, double occupancy. Is there something specific you need?" Double occupancy. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Actually, could you tell me who the second guest was? For our records." "I'm sorry, sir, but I can only provide that information to the primary guest or with proper authorization." "I understand. Thank you." I hung up and stared at the receipts. 2 rooms booked, 2 different stories, and somewhere in Denver, my wife had been playing house with someone who wasn't me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of work while my mind raced. When Lila came home from school, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lila was 13, sharp as a tack, and had inherited my sarcasm along with Jessica's green eyes. She was the one person in our family who still seemed to genuinely like spending time with me. "Just work stuff, kiddo. How was school?" She dropped her backpack and grabbed an apple from the counter. "Boring. Mom called and said she won't be back until Sunday now. Something about extended training." Extended training. Of course. That night, I lay in our empty king-size bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere in Denver, Jessica was probably in another king suite, learning new skills from Derek Malone's curriculum. My phone buzzed, a text from Jess. "Hotel Wi-Fi is terrible. Don't wait up. Love you." Love you. The words felt like acid on my screen. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. Mrs. Fletcher across the way was still up, her living room light glowing behind drawn curtains. She was probably watching her late-night crime shows, completely oblivious to the real drama unfolding right across the street. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start gathering evidence. If Jessica wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. But I wouldn't be playing to lose. The water heater kicked on in the garage, and I listened to it struggle to life. Some things, I thought, were worth fixing. Others needed to be replaced entirely. Jessica returned from Denver on Sunday evening with a glow that had nothing to do with professional development. She was animated, chatty, and kept checking her phone with little smiles that made my skin crawl. "How was the training?" I asked over dinner, watching her push salad around her plate. "Incredibly valuable. Derek really knows how to structure a learning experience." She looked up at me with bright eyes. "We covered so many new methodologies. Team building, strategic planning, performance optimization." "Sounds intensive," I said, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary. Mason, our 16-year-old, looked up from his phone long enough to grunt. "Can I go to Tyler's after dinner?" "Sure, honey," Jess said quickly. "Just be back by 10?" Lila, more observant than her brother, glanced between us. "Mom, you forgot to bring us anything. You always bring us something from your trips." Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, the hotel gift shop was closed when I left. Early flight." But I'd checked her flight. She'd flown back at 6 p.m., plenty of time for gift shop visits. Just another small lie in what I was beginning to realize was a carefully constructed web of deception. After the kids disappeared to their rooms, Jessica headed for the shower. I waited until I heard the water running, then slipped into her home office. Her laptop was closed, but her purse sat open on the desk chair. I felt like a criminal going through my own wife's belongings, but the feeling passed quickly. Inside her wallet, I found what I was looking for. More hotel receipts, carefully tucked behind her credit cards. The Hyatt Regency Chicago, the Westin Seattle, the Renaissance Phoenix, all from the past 3 months. All showing double occupancy when cross-referenced with her expense reports that claimed single rooms. But the real jackpot was in the side pocket of her purse. A rideshare receipt from Denver. Pickup location, Marriott downtown. Drop-off, 1247 Elm Street, apartment 15B. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Upstairs, the shower was still running. Jessica always took long showers after her trips, as if she was washing something off. The next morning, while Jessica was at work and the kids were at school, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Kowalski, and he operated out of a strip mall office between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. He was exactly what you'd expect from a PI. Rumpled suit, coffee-stained tie, and eyes that had seen too much. "Cheating spouse?" he asked before I'd even sat down. "That obvious?" 23 years in this business. You get a feel for these things." He pulled out a yellow legal pad. "What's your situation?" I laid out everything. The phone calls, the receipts, the hotel confirmations, the address in Denver. Frank took notes in handwriting that looked like chicken scratch. "This Derek character," he said when I finished. "He married?" "Yeah. Wife named Clara, 2 kids in high school." Frank nodded. "That's good. Gives us leverage if we need it." He quoted me a daily rate that made me wince, but I agreed. "I'll need a few days to set up surveillance. In the meantime, keep documenting everything, and whatever you do, don't confront her yet. Let her think she's getting away with it." That was the hardest part, pretending everything was normal while my world crumbled around me. Jessica continued her routine of late-night phone calls, mysterious text messages, and sudden emergency meetings that required overnight stays. 2 weeks later, Frank called with an update. "Your wife and her boss are scheduled for a conference in Atlanta next week," he said. "I've got a guy down there who can get us photos, video, whatever you need." "Do it," I said without hesitation. The photos arrived in my email 3 days later, and they were everything I'd feared and more. Jessica and Derek holding hands in a hotel lobby, Derek's arm around her waist as they walked into a restaurant. A shot of them through a hotel room window, silhouetted against the curtains in an embrace that left no doubt about their relationship. But the real evidence came from the financial trail Frank had uncovered. Jessica and Derek had been coordinating their expense reports, filing for separate rooms while actually sharing accommodations. It was fraud. Corporate fraud that could cost them both their jobs and potentially land them in legal trouble. I printed everything and put it in a folder labeled Training Materials. Then I sat in my home office staring at 18 years of marriage reduced to a stack of photographs and receipts. My phone rang. Jessica. "Hey, honey, I'm going to be late tonight. Derek called an emergency strategy session for the Johnson account." Of course he did, I said, looking at a photo of her kissing him in an elevator. Don't work too hard. Love you, she said, the words as empty as our marriage bed. Yeah, I replied. See you when you get home? But I wouldn't be home when she got there. I had my own strategy session to attend, and the agenda was going to be very different from what Jessica and Derek had planned. I started small, subtle, the kind of revenge that builds slowly, like water damage behind drywall, invisible until the whole structure collapses. First, I created anonymous email accounts and began sending carefully crafted messages to Derek's wife, Clara. Nothing accusatory at first, just innocent questions about her husband's extensive travel schedule, how she managed with him being away so much for training seminars. Clara responded enthusiastically, apparently starved for adult conversation. Through our email exchanges, I learned that Derek had been lying to her too, claiming solo business trips while actually coordinating romantic getaways with my wife. It's so hard when they're gone all the time, Clara wrote. Derek's been traveling twice as much this year. Sometimes I wonder if there's more to these conferences than just business, you know? Oh, I knew. Meanwhile, I began my own investigation into their expense reports. As an IT consultant, I had legitimate reasons to review corporate financial systems, and Jessica's company had been one of my clients for years. A few careful queries into their database revealed the full scope of their fraud. Derek and Jessica had been double billing for accommodations across 6 different cities over 8 months. They'd file for separate rooms, then Derek would cancel one reservation and upgrade the other to a suite. The company was being billed for 2 rooms while they shared one. Conservative estimate, they'd stolen about $15,000 in fraudulent expenses. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. I wanted them to feel secure, confident, untouchable. The higher they climbed, the further they'd fall. Jessica's behavior at home became increasingly careless. She'd leave her phone face up during dinner, and I'd see Derek's messages flash across the screen. Can't wait for Phoenix, one read. Same room, same plan, said another, followed by a heart emoji that made me want to throw her phone across the room. She started working late 3 nights a week, always with Derek. Strategic planning sessions, she called them. The kids barely noticed. Mason was wrapped up in his senior year drama, and Lila was busy with soccer and friends. Our family dinners became exercises in polite fiction, with Jessica playing the devoted wife while texting her lover under the table. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in October. Jessica announced another last-minute business trip, this time to San Francisco for a client presentation that would keep her away through the weekend. Derek thinks this could be a huge opportunity for the company, she said, not meeting my eyes. If we land this account, it could mean a promotion. That's great, honey, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. You deserve all the success in the world. She smiled at me then, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married. Then her phone buzzed, and the mask slipped back into place. That night, after she'd packed her new lingerie for another client presentation, I made my move. I'd planted a voice-activated recording device in her luggage months earlier. A tiny thing, no bigger than a thumb drive, tucked into the lining of her makeup case. The audio files were automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server I'd set up. What I heard from San Francisco destroyed any lingering hope I had for our marriage. God, I can't believe how easy this has been. Jessica's voice, clear as day through my headphones. Nathan is so clueless. He actually thinks I'm working. Derek's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Poor bastard. I almost feel sorry for him. Don't, Jessica said, and the ice in her voice made my blood run cold. He's had this coming for years. All those nights he chose his computer over me, all those weekends he spent in that garage instead of taking me somewhere nice. He stopped trying, Derek. He stopped seeing me. Well, I see you, Derek said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. And I like what I see. What followed was 20 minutes of intimate conversation that confirmed everything I'd suspected and more. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. Derek was going to leave Clara after the holidays. Jessica was going to file for divorce and take me for everything she could get. Nathan built that business from nothing, she said. Half of it should be mine anyway. And with the kids, I'll get the house, alimony, the works. What about the expense reports? Derek asked. Think anyone will notice? Please, Jessica scoffed. Nathan set up their accounting system. It's so convoluted, they'll never figure it out. Besides, we'll be long gone before anyone starts asking questions. I turned off the recording and sat in my dark office, staring at the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. Jessica had taken it down months ago, claiming she wanted to redecorate. Now I understood. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically dismantling our life together, planning to leave me with nothing while she rode off into the sunset with Derek, and half of everything I'd worked to build. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married. The man who'd built a successful business from nothing wasn't going to roll over and play dead while she robbed him blind. I opened my laptop and began typing. If Jessica wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real strategy looked like. But this training session was going to have a very different curriculum than what she'd planned. The agenda was about to change. The next phase required patience and precision. I spent 2 weeks preparing while Jessica and Derek continued their charade, growing bolder and more careless with each passing day. I started by documenting everything with forensic detail. Every expense report, every hotel receipt, every rideshare confirmation. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and locations, building an airtight case of corporate fraud that would make any prosecutor salivate. But the financial crimes were just the beginning. Through my email correspondence with Clara Malone, I'd learned that Derek had been lying about more than just his travel companions. He'd been siphoning money from their joint accounts, claiming the withdrawals were for business expenses that would be reimbursed. Clara was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about their finances. "I found a credit card statement I'd never seen before," she wrote to me. "Derek says it's for business, but there are charges for jewelry, expensive dinners, hotel upgrades. When I ask about it, he gets angry and says I don't understand how business works." I understood exactly how Derek's business worked. He was financing his affair with Jessica using money that belonged to his wife and children. Meanwhile, at Jessica's company, I began planting seeds of doubt about their relationship. As their IT consultant, I had legitimate reasons to be in their offices, and I made sure to schedule my visits during Derek and Jessica's strategy sessions. "They certainly spend a lot of time together," I mentioned casually to Sarah Chen, the HR director, after walking past Derek's office where he and Jessica were huddled over a laptop, sitting much closer than necessary. "Derek believes in mentorship," Sarah replied, but I caught the slight frown that crossed her face. "Of course," I said, "though I hope they're being careful about appearances. You know how office gossip can spiral." Sarah's frown deepened. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific," I said with a shrug. "Just that they travel together a lot, work late together, grab dinner after meetings. I'm sure it's all perfectly professional, but you know how people talk." I left that conversation knowing I'd planted exactly the right seed. Sarah Chen was a by-the-book HR professional who took company policies very seriously. She'd be watching Derek and Jessica more carefully now, looking for any sign of impropriety. The next week, Jessica announced another business trip, this time to Miami for a regional conference. She was practically glowing with excitement, humming as she packed her bags. "Derek really thinks this could be a career-defining opportunity," she said, holding up a new dress I'd never seen before. "He's been such an amazing mentor." "I'm sure he has," I replied, watching her fold the dress carefully into her suitcase. It was red, expensive, and definitely not conference attire. That Thursday evening, while Jessica was supposedly attending welcome cocktails in Miami, I made my move. I called Derek's house. "Hello?" Clara's voice sounded tired. "Hi, Clara. This is Nathan Ward, Jessica's husband. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Oh, hi, Nathan. No, not at all. The kids are doing homework. What's up?" "I'm probably being paranoid," I said, injecting just the right amount of uncertainty into my voice. "But I was trying to reach Jessica, and the hotel says they don't have anyone registered under her name. I'm wondering if I got the hotel wrong. Derek's at the same conference. Do you happen to know where he's staying?" There was a long pause. "Conference? What conference?" "The regional conference in Miami. Jessica said Derek thought it would be valuable for both of them to attend." Another pause, longer this time. "Nathan, Derek isn't at any conference. He's supposed to be in Tampa, meeting with a client. Solo." The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. I'm sure there's a simple explanation," I said finally. "I'm sure there is," Clara replied, but her voice had gone cold. "Nathan, could you do me a favor? Could you send me the details about this conference? The hotel, the dates, whatever information you have?" "Of course," I said. "I'll email you everything." And I did. I sent Clara every piece of evidence I had. The hotel receipts, the travel itineraries, the expense reports, even some of the photos Frank had taken. I packaged it all as a concerned husband trying to figure out why his wife seemed to be lying about her whereabouts. Clara called me back 2 hours later. "Nathan," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "we need to talk." We met the next morning at a coffee shop downtown. Clara Malone was a striking woman in her early 40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. She looked like she hadn't slept. "How long have you known?" she asked without preamble. "I suspected for months," I said. but I didn't have proof until recently. She slid a folder across the table. I spent all night going through Derek's things. Credit card statements, phone records, everything. Her laugh was bitter. 22 years of marriage, and I never thought to check up on him. Stupid. You're not stupid, I said. You trusted him. That's what people do in a marriage. Well, that was my mistake. She opened the folder and showed me bank statements, credit card bills, and phone logs. He's been spending thousands on this affair. Hotels, restaurants, jewelry, clothes, and look at this. She pointed to a series of cash withdrawals from their joint account. 500 here, 1,000 there, always on the days before his business trips with your wife. I studied the documents, my anger building with each fraudulent expense. Clara, I think we can help each other. How? Derek and Jessica think they're untouchable. They think we're too stupid or too trusting to figure out what they're doing. But they're wrong. I leaned forward. What if we coordinated our response? Hit them from both sides at the same time? Clara's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm listening. We spent the next hour planning our counterattack. Clara would file for divorce and freeze their joint accounts. I would submit the evidence of corporate fraud to Jessica's company and file my own divorce papers. We'd time everything for maximum impact, ensuring that Derek and Jessica would be blindsided from multiple directions simultaneously. There's one more thing, I said, as we prepared to leave. They're planning to leave their spouses after the holidays. Jessica thinks she's going to take me for everything in the divorce. Not if we move first, Clara said grimly. I've already called my lawyer. Derek's going to discover that adultery still matters in divorce proceedings, especially when it involves corporate fraud. As I watched Clara walk away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope for my marriage. That was dead and buried. But hope that justice would be served, that Jessica and Derek would face consequences for their betrayal. I pulled out my phone and called Frank, my private investigator. It's time, I said when he answered. I need everything you've got, and I need it by Monday. You sure about this? Frank asked. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I thought about Jessica humming as she packed her red dress, about Derek's smug laughter on the recording, about 18 years of marriage reduced to lies and expense reports. I'm sure, I said. Let's end this. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October drizzle that made everything look tired and defeated. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Jessica and Derek had returned from Miami the night before, both glowing with the satisfaction of another successful business trip. Jessica had regaled the kids with stories about the conference sessions she'd attended, the networking opportunities she'd pursued, the valuable contacts she'd made. All lies, of course. I knew exactly what they'd been doing in Miami, thanks to Frank's comprehensive surveillance report. The photos were damning, Derek and Jessica checking into the same hotel suite, holding hands on the beach, sharing intimate dinners at restaurants that definitely weren't hosting corporate events. But today, the bill was coming due. At exactly 9 a.m., while Jessica was in her morning meeting and Derek was in his corner office, I walked into the headquarters of Morrison & Associates, Jessica's company. I carried a manila envelope containing 18 months of evidence, meticulously organized and documented. Sarah Chen, the HR director, looked surprised to see me. Nathan, what brings you here so early? I need to report a serious policy violation, I said, setting the envelope on her desk. It involves Jessica Ward and Derek Malone. Sarah's expression shifted from friendly to professional. What kind of violation? Corporate fraud, expense account manipulation, and an undisclosed romantic relationship between a supervisor and subordinate. I opened the envelope and spread the contents across her desk. It's all documented here. Sarah's face went white as she examined the evidence. Hotel receipts, expense reports, bank statements, photographs. It was overwhelming and irrefutable. My God, she whispered, looking at a photo of Derek and Jessica kissing in an elevator. How long has this been going on? At least 18 months, I said. They've been filing fraudulent expense reports, double billing for accommodations, and using company funds to finance their affair. Conservative estimate puts the theft at around $20,000. Sarah was already reaching for her phone. I need to call Mr. Morrison immediately. Nathan, I'm going to need you to stay and give a formal statement. Of course, I said. I've also prepared copies of everything for the police, in case you decide to pursue criminal charges. While Sarah made her calls, I sat in the conference room and watched through the glass walls as the company's executives huddled in urgent conversation. Within an hour, security guards were escorting both Jessica and Derek to separate offices for questioning. I didn't get to see Jessica's face when they confronted her with the evidence, but I could imagine it. The shock, the denial, the desperate attempts to explain away the unexplainable. Derek, according to Sarah, had immediately tried to throw Jessica under the bus, claiming she'd manipulated him into the fraud scheme. Honor among thieves, apparently, was as fictional as their expense reports. By noon, both Jessica and Derek had been suspended pending a full investigation. Their company credit cards were canceled, their access to corporate systems revoked, and their personal belongings packed into boxes by security. I was in my car, driving home, when Jessica called. "Nathan!" Her voice was hysterical, barely controlled. "What did you do? What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," I said calmly. "About the expense fraud, about the affair, about everything." "You bastard! You've ruined everything. Derek and I could go to prison." "That's a possibility," I agreed. "Corporate fraud is a felony, but I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're very creative when it comes to problem solving." "Nathan, please," she said, and now she was crying. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling, fix our marriage. I'll end things with Derek." "Too late for that," I said, pulling into our driveway. "Check your email." I hung up and walked into our house, where divorce papers were waiting on the kitchen table. I'd had them served to Jessica's office an hour after her suspension, ensuring maximum humiliation in front of her coworkers. My phone rang again. This time, it was Derek. "You son of a bitch," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've done." "Actually, I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I've exposed 2 criminals who thought they were smarter than everyone else. How's Clara taking the news?" The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Clara had moved fast, just as we'd planned. "She froze our accounts," Derek said finally. "She filed for divorce this morning. She's taking everything." "Gee, that's terrible," I said with mock sympathy. "Almost like actions have consequences." "This isn't over," Derek threatened. "I'll fight this. I'll prove you set us up." "Good luck with that," I said. "But you might want to focus on finding a criminal defense lawyer instead. I hear the FBI takes corporate fraud very seriously these days." I hung up and poured myself a scotch, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Fletcher peering through her curtains, probably wondering why there were so many strange cars in our driveway. Soon she'd have plenty to gossip about. The front door slammed open, and Jessica stormed in, her face red with rage and tears. 18 years, she screamed. 18 years of marriage, and this is how you handle things? You destroy my career, my reputation, everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. "You mean the career you built by sleeping with your boss and stealing from your company?" "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of the recording from San Francisco. Her voice, clear and damning, talking about taking me for everything I was worth. "Want to hear more?" Jessica's face crumpled. "You recorded us?" "I documented everything. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out?" She sank into a chair, finally understanding the scope of what she'd lost. "What happens now?" "Now you face the consequences," I said. "The company will probably fire you both. Derek's wife is divorcing him and taking half of everything. You'll be lucky if you avoid criminal charges." "And us?" I looked at this woman I'd once loved, this stranger who'd systematically destroyed our family for a few stolen weekends with her boss. "There is no us. There hasn't been for months." Jessica began to cry then, deep sobbing that shook her whole body. But I felt nothing. The man who would have comforted her, who would have tried to work things out, was gone. She'd killed him with her lies and betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Derek just called. He's begging me to take him back. I told him to go to hell. How are you holding up?" I typed back, "Justice feels better than I expected." Outside, Mrs. Fletcher was still watching from her window. Tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would know that the perfect couple in the house with the manicured lawn had been living a lie. But for the first time in months, I didn't care what anyone thought. I'd played by the rules for 18 years, and it had gotten me a cheating wife and a broken family. Now I was writing my own rules, and the first one was simple. Actions have consequences. Jessica was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers, depositions, and damage control. Jessica and Derek's affair became the talk of Morrison and Associates, with details leaking out despite HR's attempts at discretion. The story had everything: sex, money, corporate fraud, and betrayed spouses seeking revenge. It was better than a soap opera, and just as destructive to everyone involved. The company's investigation confirmed everything I documented and more. Derek had been using his position to manipulate expense approvals, covering for Jessica's fraudulent reports while filing his own. They'd created a system of mutual protection that allowed them to steal with impunity until I'd exposed them. Both were terminated for cause, which meant no severance, no benefits, and no positive references. The company also filed criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, turning what had been a private matter into a very public scandal. Jessica's arrest made the local news. "Corporate executive charged in expense fraud scheme," read the headline, above a photo of her being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. She'd tried to hide her face, but the cameras caught her anyway. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't need to. I was too busy dealing with the aftermath in my own life. The kids took the news about as well as could be expected, which is to say, terribly. Mason blamed me for destroying the family, claiming I should have handled things privately instead of humiliating Mom in public. Lila was more understanding, but I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Why didn't you just talk to her?" she asked one evening as we sat in the kitchen, picking at takeout Chinese food. "Maybe you could have worked things out." "Some things can't be worked out, kiddo," I said. "When someone lies to you for months, steals money, and plans to leave you with nothing, talking isn't going to fix that." "But she's our mom." "I know, and she'll always be your mom, but she's not my wife anymore." The divorce proceedings moved quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd compiled. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue for alimony and a 50-50 split of assets, but the adultery and fraud charges made that impossible. In the end, she agreed to a settlement that left her with a small portion of our savings and the used Honda she'd driven before her affair began. Derek fared even worse. Clara's divorce attorney was a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. Between the adultery, the financial fraud, and the money he'd stolen from their joint accounts, Derek lost almost everything. His house, his retirement accounts, even his Tesla, all went to Clara and their children. The criminal cases were still pending, but both Jessica and Derek had been advised by their lawyers to expect plea bargains that would include restitution, probation, and permanent black marks on their records. Neither would work in corporate America again. 6 months after that first night in the garage when I'd heard Jessica's whispered phone call, I was sitting in my lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers. 18 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents and a property settlement that gave me almost everything I'd worked to build. "How do you feel?" my lawyer asked as I handed back the signed papers. "Relieved," I said, and meant it. "Ready to move on." And I was. The house felt different now. Smaller somehow, but also cleaner. I'd redecorated, removing all traces of Jessica's presence. The wedding photos were gone, replaced by pictures of me with the kids. Her office had become my workshop, where I tinkered with electronics and planned the expansion of my consulting business. The business, ironically, was thriving. Word had gotten out about how I'd uncovered the fraud at Morrison & Associates, and other companies were hiring me to audit their expense systems and IT security. Betrayal, it turned out, was good for business. Clara and I had become friends of a sort, bonded by our shared experience of betrayal and revenge. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, comparing notes on our ex-spouse's continued downward spiral. Derek was working as a car salesman, living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old Corolla. Jessica had taken a job at a call center, using her maiden name and hoping no one would recognize her from the news coverage. "Do you ever feel bad for them?" Clara asked during one of our coffee meetings. "No," I said without hesitation. "They made their choices. They knew the risks, and they decided we were too stupid or too weak to fight back. They were wrong." Clara nodded. "Derek called last week. He wanted to explain everything, to make me understand why he did it, as if there was some explanation that would make 18 months of lies acceptable." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that explanations were for people who made mistakes. What he did was a choice, made over and over again for more than a year. You don't get to explain away that kind of betrayal." She was right. Jessica had tried the same thing with me, calling and texting for weeks after the divorce was finalized. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to somehow make me understand that it hadn't been about hurting me. It had been about feeling alive again, about passion and excitement, and all the things our marriage had supposedly lacked. I'd listened to her voicemails exactly once, then blocked her number. Some conversations weren't worth having. The kids were adjusting, slowly. Mason had graduated and was heading to college in the fall, far enough away that he could escape the local gossip, but close enough for weekend visits. Lila had decided to live with me full-time, visiting Jessica on weekends and holidays. The arrangement suited everyone, especially Jessica, who was struggling to make ends meet on her call center salary. "Dad," Lila said one evening as we worked together in the kitchen, making dinner, "are you ever going to date again?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. Maybe someday. Why?" "Just wondering. You seem happier now than you did when you were married to Mom." Out of the mouths of babes. She was right, of course. I was happier, lighter, free from the constant stress of wondering what Jessica was really doing, who she was really with, what lies she was telling. Your mom and I weren't good for each other anymore, I said carefully. Sometimes people grow apart, and sometimes they make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love. When that happens, it's better to be honest about it than to keep pretending everything's okay. Lila nodded solemnly. I'm glad you found out the truth, even if it hurt. Me too, kiddo. Me too. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, I sat in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a security system for a new client. It was detailed work, requiring patience and precision, qualities I'd developed over the past year in ways I'd never expected. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Despite having blocked Jessica's phone, she occasionally found ways to reach me through borrowed phones or new accounts. Nathan, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I made terrible mistakes, and I lost everything that mattered. I hope someday you can forgive me. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness was for people who deserved it, and Jessica had forfeited that right when she'd chosen Derek over our family. But as I turned back to my work, I realized that forgiveness wasn't really the point anymore. I didn't need to forgive Jessica to move on with my life. I just needed to remember the lessons she'd taught me about trust, betrayal, and the importance of standing up for yourself when the people you love decide to tear your world apart. The security system I was building would protect my client's business from theft and fraud. But the real security, the kind that mattered, came from knowing that I'd never again be the trusting fool who let someone steal from him for 18 months without fighting back. Some training, it turned out, was invaluable, and this particular curriculum had taught me everything I needed to know about protecting what was mine.